Okay, why don't we start? We know that there are a couple more, or we assume there are a couple more board members who are on their way, but they've been through this all before. And I thought we'd start with introductions, and with luck, they will come in time to introduce themselves. Before we do that, just want to let you know that this is being taped. It's not going out live, but it will be posted on the website. So bear that in mind. When you want to make comments, please come to the mic so you will be recorded and visible to the camera, as well as to us. Okay. The board consists of 7 members appointed by the village manager for 5-year terms. I am Alan Stahl. I've been chair of the board only since January, but I was a member of it for 10 years before that. I live in the Sparta Historic District, 11 Fairview Place. I was for 15 years the president of the Jug Tavern of Sparta, which is a historic site within the district. I lead tours during the warm weather. Please join us on Sundays. You'll see it posted all over the internet and everything, of the Sparta Historic District. My house is a contributing house built in 1888, and I hold a PhD in history and teach in the history department at Princeton University. Adam?
I'm Adam Markovics.
Adam, it has to be up, the red one.
How's that? Okay.
There you go.
I'm Adam Markovics. I've lived in Ossining for almost 3 years now. I live in one of the older houses in the community, built 1850s or so. I've been on the HPC for a bit over a year now, and I serve as vice chair.
Lisa?
I'm Lisa Buckley. I'm a consultant to the Historic Preservation Commission.
I'm Lynn Brooks-Avney. I'm the director of the village's director of planning and development. Sorry, I'm Lynn Brooks-Avney. I'm the village's director of planning and development.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Stuart Kahan. I'm the village's corporation counsel.
Good afternoon. Good evening, everyone. My name is Miguel Hernandez. I'm about a 35-year resident of the village of Ossining. I had the honor of serving you as a village trustee and as interim mayor. I've been on the Historic Preservation Commission now for about 8 years or so, and I guess that's about it. I am a historian. I have a master's in American history, and I have a certificate in historic preservation from Drew University. Thank you.
Hi, Phil Ferranda. No?
Yes.
Okay. Phil Ferranda. I am a native of Ossining. Actually spent a chunk of my childhood on Linden Avenue at 32. And I am a real estate broker with a business on North State Road. I've been on the HPC for 3 months. Thanks.
Okay, and we have another member of the commission who is sitting halfway between the audience and the commission, because she is officially recused from this not from the discussion, but from the deliberations, because, as you will hear, she lives on Ellis Place. Dana?
Oh, Dana White, Ossining Village Historian, 24 Ellis Place, proud Ellis Placeian.
Okay. All right, so let's begin. I'll tell you first the general nature of tonight and how it fits into the whole process. And then we'll go through a formal slideshow, and then we're really up for discussion. The way the Historic Preservation Commission and its functioning works is that we are charged by the village with several tasks, but one is designating areas that we think should come under landmark protection. and this is an ongoing, long process. About 2 years ago, after we did the Main Street district, which was the first big district that had been done in decades after Sparta, we compiled a list of individual buildings and neighborhoods that we might consider for landmarking, and this was 60 places long, and we've spent a long time winnowing it down and prioritizing. After we did Main Street, we did a few single buildings around town, and now the time has come to consider Ellis Place, which was the neighborhood that we considered the highest priority for landmarking among those that have not been landmarked, that is, except for Sparta and the Downtown Historic District. The way the process works is that we are holding tonight's session as an informal information sharing session. And I mean sharing because we will inform you of what's going on, what's involved, what the process is, what the processes would be were Ellis Place to be landmarked. And equally, we want to hear your questions, but we also want to hear your concerns so we can continue deliberating. Next Monday at our regular business meeting, this is not an official business meeting, this is an informal public get-together. Next week at our business meeting, we will discuss what came up tonight and decide whether we want to continue moving on. We might vote to actually move forward with the landmarking. We might decide to leave it as it is. We might decide to discount the idea of landmarking. If we should decide to move forward, we will then draft a proposed landmarking regulation, and then there will be an official public hearing before the Historic Preservation Commission at one of our regularly scheduled meetings, after which we will finally vote whether we are in favor of landmarking. But that's just us. We are advisory to the Board of Trustees. Should we vote that we are in favor of landmarking Ellis Place, it would then go to the Board of Trustees, which itself would hold a public hearing. And only after that public hearing would they vote, and their vote is determinative. It is a decision of the Board of Trustees. So this is the first of at least 3 public meetings on the subject. And this is the non-official one. We decided before we get into the official process and hearing, we wanted to hear what you had to say, especially those of you, and I think it's most of you, who are residents of Ellis Place, but also the community in general. Okay, so let's go through the PowerPoint and let me briefly summarize the process and the considerations. Okay, can we have the next one, please? Okay, all right, now, what is the Historic Preservation Commission? We are a commission of the village. I suppose most of you understand, but most people are confused by the distinction between the village and the town. We are a commission of the village, that is, we respond to the Board of Trustees of the village. The membership consists of 7 members appointed by the village manager. And there are specific guidelines for the appointment of members. We try to include among the membership professionals in historic preservation, professional architects, professional realtors, professional historians, an attorney, and then other members of the general public. And as I said, that is the choice of the village manager who gets appointed. We have 3 main duties that we're charged with. One is the process we have tonight, that is deciding which properties we want to recommend, properties or neighborhoods we want to recommend to the Board of Trustees for official landmarking. I should also point out that we are not the only one who can bring up a question to landmark a building. Any person can bring before us the request to landmark a building. So far, in my experience, it's generally been that we've been the ones who introduce the question, but it is open to the public to say, I think such and such a building should be landmarked. Would you consider it? So that's our first duty, is to consider and present to the Board of Trustees recommendations on the landmarking of specific buildings or specific neighborhoods. Second is that once a neighborhood or building has been landmarked, we have the responsibility to deal with all proposed changes to the exterior, and we'll get into in a minute what that involves, and decide if they are appropriate or inappropriate, given the historic nature of the building and given the specifics of the change that is proposed. If we decide that it's appropriate, we issue a certificate of appropriateness. If we decide it's not appropriate, then it's up to the person to continue the process until whatever change they want is deemed appropriate. And the third is public education, to acquaint the public with the historic nature of the Ossining Village, its specific landmarks, and also the process of the landmark process. Our most recent public array into that has been the Museum in the Streets program, which I'm sure you've seen around town. That took about 2 years of our lives, putting together the history and the photographs and the easements and legal permissions and all of that to go ahead with that project. So that's part of our public education function. Okay, next. Why designate landmarks? Okay, you can read what it says here. Basically, it is found that a landmark district maintains its integrity, its beauty, and historic nature much better if it is under the guidance of a landmark historic commission like ours than if it's just left to the individual residents of that area. And so that's what we're concerned about, is maintaining the historical integrity, in this case of a neighborhood, or in other cases of an individual building. Okay, next. A HAD, Historical and Architectural Design District. So that is a distinct section of the village with historic or aesthetic importance, and in some cases, like in Ellis Place, a combination of the two. Identified with historic personages, well, we don't have George Washington or Alexander Hamilton or any kind of other major historic things, but within the history of Ossining, there are historic personages connected with Ellis Place, as you'll see in your handout, and embody distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction. That is more or less a walking encyclopedia of a certain type of building. And the existing historic districts in Ossining are Sparta at the south end of the village and downtown Ossining. By the way, we have two members who have come in since we did our introductions. You want to start? Just introduce yourself to the audience.
I'm Joanne Tall. I'm an architect. I specialize in historic preservation, and I live in Sparta.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Deborah Van Steen. I'm an architectural historian by profession, and I'm a member of the Historic Review Commission. I'm also a resident of Ossining and live in an old house.
Okay. All right, so now we get to the question of the specifics of Ellis Place, why it came to the top of our list of districts as well as above other individual houses for landmarking. Not only is it old, but it is planned, and that's important. That is, it was conceived as a unit, the street was laid out at a certain time and filled not all at once. It's not a development, but it was a planned community, and that's quite important in the history of New York State communities. It contains some of the finest examples of Victorian period architecture, including these various types of Victorian architecture, which we rely on Deborah to distinguish for us, since not all of us are specialists in telling vernacular from Queen Anne. And it was home to many of Ossing's prominent professional and business families. We chose those words carefully. It was not the home of the richest people. Those are the estates around Ossining, more out in the town. But it was a certain class of business and professional people who built homes on Ellis Place and gave it its distinctive character. Okay, next. When is a certificate of appropriateness required? As I said, the second of our duties is granting specific properties certificates of appropriateness for specific changes to the property. Notice this is changes. We never go in and tell someone to change anything. It's only when someone wants to change something that we view the change in question and consider if that change is appropriate. And changes are only to the exterior of the building, the property. It does include all the buildings and structures, outbuildings, walls, fences, steps. It's only exterior changes. It does include construction, that is, should there be a new wing or even an outbuilding proposed, reconstruction, alteration, removal, or demolition. Next. When is a certificate of appropriateness not required? It has nothing to do with the inside of the house. We do not look in the house. We do not go in the house. We don't care what you do with the inside of the house unless it affects the outside appearance. I mean, if you're gutting something so much that to the street it looks like the house, the interior of the house no longer has its integrity, that might come up. But generally, and in my experience, everything we've always done has been to the exterior. We don't intervene or require a certificate of appropriateness for maintenance. That is, if you have wood that is rotting and you replace it with wood that looks the same, that's fine. We don't intervene there. And through long, hard experience, we have come to the conclusion, as I think most historic preservation commissions have, that we don't rule on color. You can paint the house whatever color you want. That takes up a lot of time of commissions. You get into questions of, well, did the Victorians like bright colors? Did they like restrained colors? The other consideration for that is that color is the easiest thing to reverse. And this is something we always take into account when looking at a proposed change. Can it be easily reversed, or does it make a change that would be difficult or impossible to come back from? And color is very easily reversed. Now, it's really painted surfaces. We will not allow people to paint brick, for example, because that is not reversible and it causes permanent damage to the structure as well as the looks of a historic building for the brick to be painted. But I guess there's one or two brick buildings on Ellis Place. Okay. You have a draft, and you see we wrote the word draft on it because this is subject to change as we continue the process that illustrates and lists every house on Ellis Place. You'll note that most of these pictures were taken with snow on the ground. This was last year's snow. It's taken us a year from walking up and down the street, taking pictures and looking at the houses to where we are tonight. And this is based on research in the Ossining Historic Society, the Building Department, Planning Department, and Dana's booklet on Ellis Place, yes, and other sources, but we are very much open to more information, especially if any of you have information on the history of your house. We would love it if you would share it with us. And the houses on page 54 have a listing of whether they are contributing or non-contributing. Contributing means that house has a historical presence that contributes to the historic nature of the district. Non-contributing houses are mainly ones that were built after World War II or have been so altered that they no longer contribute to the district. So you can see which ones are and which ones aren't. Okay. Doesn't matter, however, if a building is contributing or non-contributing. Any changes to the exterior of all buildings in a designated district need to get a certificate of appropriateness from our board. Next. And there are varying criteria depending on whether a building is contributing or non-contributing. Contributing, they have to remain compatible with the historic character of the district. Non-contributing, the changes must be compatible with the overall nature of the district, not just that property. New construction, we had a house burned down on Ellis Place a few years back, as you know. If it is landmarked, then future such new construction would have to pass muster under the commission to be considered appropriate for infill, as it's called, in that neighborhood. Okay, the timetable. If we decide to move ahead, we then write out a formal application, submit it to the Board of Trustees. It's sent to the Planning Board and the Historic Preservation Commission. The Planning Board makes a recommendation. Then if they recommend to go ahead, it comes back to us, and we hold a legal public hearing. This tonight is, remember, informal. If we get to that point, it would then be an official public hearing. We then vote whether to recommend the landmarking to the Board of Trustees or not. If we vote to recommend it to the Board of Trustees, then the Board of Trustees holds a hearing, and then they vote whether or not to landmark. Okay, let me call on the rest of the board and the staff if they have things to add to this before we open it up to questions and comments. Joanne, are you?
I guess one note I wanted to clarify about paint colors. Obviously, we don't review change of paint color. We only review if it's a previously unpainted surface that you then want to paint, whether it be brick or, I don't think this is case in Ellis Place, but let's say it was timber frame natural wood and that sort of a thing. That's all.
Anybody else? Miguel?
Just one more thing that I think is important to bear in mind, that in my experience, both here in Ossining and in other historic districts that I've seen around the country, generally buildings hold their value steadily, and in fact, in many instances, there is an improvement in value. so that living in a historic house does, in some respects, increase the value, and they are desirable places to live.
Okay?
Can I add another thing? I do live in the Sparta Historic District, which is Ossinin's oldest historic district. And I've lived there since 1990. I've had an addition on my home. I've made changes to the exterior. I've put up fencing. You know, my neighbors have built new garages on their property. It's never really stopped us from doing things that we want to do. That's all.
Okay, and I will add, I live in what was built as a church and had a slate roof, and everyone says slate's wonderful, lasts 100 years, but after 100 years, not so wonderful. So after 120 years, when we had to keep putting buckets under the leaks, we priced replacing the slate roof, and we simply couldn't afford it. And so I came to the Historic Preservation Commission and made the case for changing to an artificial substance that is supposed to look like slate. It doesn't really fool anyone, but it's the general idea. And the decision was, with a house like mine, it's more important to protect the integrity of the inside from water damage. And again, a roof is ultimately restorable. So should I ever want to spend the money for slate, or should the next person who buys the house want to go back to slate, it's no problem. Nothing has been done that's irrevocable, so I got permission to change the roof from slate to non-slate. So it's not that nothing happens in historic district, it's that it's considered in the context of the rest of the district and the effect it will have on the rest of the district, any change that's made.
Mr. Chairman, can I just go through the process,
Sure,
which I think might help
absolutely.
folks? Deb, do you want to say something first? It's okay. Okay. Folks, just from the process perspective, how this works. Once there is an application, a formal application from Historic Preservation, that starts a 90-day clock. Within that 90-day period, Historic Preservation must conduct a public hearing and must issue its recommendation to the Board of Trustees. The Planning Board does get a copy of the application, but it's only to make a recommendation. They do not, in fact, have any veto power whatsoever. It's just to review it. If the Historic Preservation Commission, after the public hearing, makes a recommendation to designate Ellis Place as a historic district, it then goes to the Board of Trustees. They conduct their own public hearing. They are to consider everything that was heard by HPC, but they can hear separate testimony and get evidence as well. One thing to note, when the application for designation is filed and it is sent to the building department, that effectively stops the issuance of any future building permits in the historic district until there's a determination as to whether the historic district should in fact be approved. So that's one of the reasons that you have that 90-day clock, and then it goes to the Board of Trustees. So once the application gets filed by HPC and it's given to the building department, at that point, and that has to be no later than 30 days before the HPC's public hearing, then the building department is prohibited from issuing building permits that relate to exterior work within the historic district. I just so you folks know, and that prohibition will last until the vote by the Board of Trustees, which would either approve the designation or reject the recommendation and deny the designation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Deborah, did you want to jump in with something?
I guess so. I was hoping to hear from the audience, but since we're all speaking, I'll take my turn. I just jotted down a few notes of things that came to mind when asked basically what the benefits are of historic preservation. There's a conception, somewhat misconception, that it poses issues for our property owners without anything out of it for that owner. And since I know a number of you, and I've been on the house tour and been in your homes, I know that you have great pride of ownership, and you are a collective community in and of yourself. And I think that you deserve to retain that sense of community and protect the investment you make in your property, so that someone next to you or across the street from you cannot do something that becomes a reflection of the value of your property. Having said that, one of the benefits of historic preservation is greater neighborhood stability. People who live in historic districts tend to be more collective body. They tend to share similar values. They tend to have pride of ownership. It's not to say that if you're not in a historic district, you don't have those things, but in historic districts, you do. And one example that comes to mind that is so overwhelmingly out there is a historic district in the South Bronx that was requested to be landmarked, so that the Landmark Preservation Commission in New York City designated them, and this was during a time when the South Bronx was being burned out. And as a result of it, this neighborhood has continued to stay the way it was and continued with this sense of community. And when you drive down the street, you recognize it as a lovely place that is this shared cohesive neighborhood that decided that protecting their buildings was the best thing they could do for their property. That neighborhood also has substantially higher real estate values, which Miguel pointed out. And all of the studies that have been conducted by various groups, whether it's the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation and National Trust for Historic Preservation, have pointed to the economic benefits of historic preservation. It creates a more level, more sustainable economic value of within a neighborhood. Landmarking protects and encourages investment in private property. If you make improvements to your home, you feel somewhat assured in 10 years or 20 years, or maybe 30, when you decide to downsize and move, that that street where your house is located is going to be as nice as it was when you moved in there, if not better. And so it's going to create for you an environment where you feel somewhat assured that if you invest in your property, you're not going to see that go down the toilet because the neighborhood all of a sudden reverses and becomes really unattractive, and all of a sudden you can't get your money back out of your property. Landmarking can have a benefit to a place overall. A community that embraces its architecture and has historic districts often is a place that's viewed in a positive light by others coming into that community, and so it benefits the community as a whole. The Village of Ossining gains to benefit not just you from historic preservation. Historic preservation is viewed as being green and environmentally responsible. If you keep what you have and you preserve it, you are being the most green you can be, where throwing things away and replacing them is a less green alternative. Anyway, that's my thought on historic preservation.
Thank you. Any other people up at the table wish to speak? Well, then let's hear what you have to say. As I said, please come up to the mic so it's recorded. As I said at the beginning, this is being recorded, and the tape of it will be posted on our website. Just Google Ossining Historic Preservation to get to our website. So please come up to the mic and identify yourself, and let's hear what you have to say. Your concerns, your opinions, yeah, just come up.
Oops. How do you do? I'm Steve Casey. I live at 43 Ellis Place, and my wife Donna Bauer is over here. I know a number of people in the room as well. I know you. I know Miguel. know you as well. So just a few questions. What about conflicts between the current code, current building codes, and historical accuracy? I ran into that issue when we were trying to repair the crumbling porch rail in front of my building. We had a contractor who was able to come up with thank goodness, come up with a creative solution. But what happens when you have those kind of conflicts and you talk to the board, to the planning department, I don't remember, and they say, no, you got to do this, and it will look atrocious in terms of what you got to, if you want to preserve what you're doing.
New York State, and Joanne can correct me, New York State does not have a separate set of regulations for historic properties. That's because there was a very bad fire in a hotel a couple of decades ago where a number of people lost their lives. And so, basically speaking, you have to follow the building code regulation as prescribed, and we follow the New York State Uniform Code. We cannot make exceptions to that, generally speaking, and the idea is what you did, and that is to look for a reasonable solution so that it is aesthetically pleasing while at the same time fulfilling code.
Okay. We wouldn't get into some kind of kooky conflict between, you know, one wing saying you've got to do this and the other, oh no, that's not going to work, and you're stuck in limbo. Oh, no. Yeah.
Not at all. Oh. Not at all. Because as Deborah spoke, the code is the code. It's human health and life and safety. That paramounts historic preservation. That being said, I've worked on several buildings where, yes, we have to make a handrail a certain height or that, but we find ways to mitigate it and make it work with the historic building and save its character. And it takes a little bit more thought, but it can be done.
I think one thing that you said is creative solutions, and I've noticed in countless cases that have come before us, we are not just judgmental. We tend to be advisory and proactive, and we have some very experienced and talented people here at the practical end of things, and we have been able to suggest to applicants changes that meet our historical concerns, but also meet the concerns not only of code, but of marketplace materials, like with my roof, that are more practical financially. So we work with the people who come before us.
Okay, so we would get, if somebody here wanted to do something, some feedback like, well, no, that's not going to work, but how about thinking about this or this kind of material or doing this?
Do you know that Anderson makes a window that looks just like the old one?
Okay, okay, all right. And you may have answered a question or intimated it when you talked about some changes you've made to your house. If you wanted to make an historically sensitive addition or, you know, put up a garage or an extension, but were able to do it in a way that was quite close to the style or exactly in the style, would that be something that would be considered or would not be, I assume that would not be denied outright or?
Oh, not at all. Like perhaps with an addition to a building, we wanted to be compatible. That doesn't mean it has to be a look-alike, even. It has to be compatible. And I know we've reviewed outbuildings in a neighborhood that the outbuilding was more of a modern taste, but in its scale and its materials, it was compatible with the revolutionary cottage in front of it. You know, part of historic preservation is not, is education of the public. In saying that, we're not supposed to fool the public. The public's supposed to know what's old and what's not. But you understand it's the compatibility. You can't outscale it. It can't put in front of it, blocking it from the public, you know, so on and so forth.
Okay.
I think the other thing that's important to remind is that we stay in close contact with the buildings department, and we're part of the land use boards. So we try to coordinate what we're doing with what they're doing so that there's a flow of communication. It
Okay.
doesn't always work, but we definitely are on top of that issue. Almost every meeting we discuss, what is the building department doing? What is the, what are they saying with respect to this building or that building that is under our purview?
Okay. And then, once again, a follow-up to something you just said. What about a change to reverse back to what was the historical appearance at the time? Say you have a photograph and you want to put something back to the way it was.
That would be wonderful.
The best of all worlds.
Best of all worlds, okay.
Absolutely.
I'll
We
let other
encourage-
people
but
talk,
we-
but-
But we don't force change. We only deal with proposed changes. We won't go to you and say, take off the asphalt shingling and put back hand-nailed wooden slats. It would look so much more historic. But if you propose that to us, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, please.
Hi. William Austin, 58 Ellis Place. Two-part question. The first part is, once Ellis Place becomes historic, if that is what happens, can you explain what the process is or any additional costs in terms of having some work done on the house, what you have to do at that point, and how you approach the commission or whatnot to get that work done? The second question relates to Sparta. I was looking at the website, and it shows that there's some state funding or grants or commission that sort of encompasses the historic things. If you can explain some of how that all works as well, if there is grants, if there is money. And
I'll start with the second part with what we always say is talk to your tax professional. In fact, I couldn't answer this because my understanding is that in the new tax code that's passed, federally, there was a lessening of tax credits for historic, but the state is currently thinking of making it up, and there are proposals for the budget, which is due to be solved on April 1st, that might restore some of it, but it's very much in flux, and again, we're not professionals in that.
Yeah, I just want to say, you were talking about Sparta. One of the things with Sparta is that the district as a whole is locally landmarked. It's under our purview, but there are different, if you will, components, different designations for historic properties. And Jug Tavern is one of the properties in the village of Ossining that's actually listed in the National Register of Historic Places, and it's operated by a nonprofit. And so the monies that might be available to Jug Tavern are different than what would be available to you as a homeowner in that regard. Right now, we're going through various political changes, and so often a lot of the money that's available to the states for different programs is supplemented by federal money, which is what Alan was suggesting, that federal changes have taken place in terms of what's available, and that's trickled down to the state. And now the state is looking at their budget and what to do about that. It's always in flux, so there isn't anything we can tell you that's going to be a guarantee.
Also, it's my understanding, and you can correct me on this, that generally speaking, the tax deductions, the special tax deductions for historic properties generally applies to commercial properties. That is, if a building has tenants, for example, X number of tenants, as an example, would be considered commercial building, is that right?
It depends
So
on
they
the
would-
programs, yeah.
it depends, so it would have to be,
Yeah. In answer to your first question, if you propose a change to your property that triggers our review and requires a certificate of appropriateness, you will pay for that like you'd pay for a permit being taken out. It's a set fee, I believe. But the improvements themselves shouldn't really cost you much more than what you intended to do in the first place. I mean, I see your buildings. Most of you are very responsible homeowners, and you do lovely things with your building. So this isn't going to change how you view your property or what you do to it.
Well,
It just It's just going to make sure that it continues to stay in the character that currently exists, and if anything, improves it.
We will want to see specifics of the changes you're proposing. That is, drawings,
Catalog
product,
cuts.
catalog cuts, product information, all of that. Sometimes we ask people to actually bring the material so we can see what it's made of and how it will react to the light. Joanne, you do a lot of this sort of stuff. What, in general, do we want them to show us?
First, on the village's website, under historic preservation, there is the application form. And the application form is literally one page. But along with it, there's instructions of what to prepare. And let's say you want to change the windows in your house. You would come in with this one-page application. You would bring in photos of your house as it is now. You would bring in a catalog cut of the proposed window you would like to use. And if let's say it's aluminum clad window, a wood aluminum clad window, you come in with a little color chip from that manufacturer. That's it.
How long does the process take to get a certificate of appropriateness? Emergency with a window, when your windows breaks.
Right, there's, on our website, we have the application date, which is about a month before the meeting date, and if everything's in place at that meeting, we can approve it then. If you show up and we still have questions that you're not prepared to answer, then it could get adjourned to the next meeting, and it could go on.
Let me just interrupt. If it's an emergency situation,
Or it's a repair,
then
it comes under maintenance.
And then
it wouldn't come before.
right. The code specifically provides that if it is reconstruction, demolition, but the building inspector determines it's required by public safety, for example, then it doesn't come within the certificate of appropriateness. Further, if it's maintenance and repair, it doesn't come within the certificate of
How
appropriateness.
frequently are those meetings that you have?
Once a month.
So once a month?
It's on our website. It's usually the first Monday of the month. Yeah, please come up.
Hi, so,
Can you identify yourself, please, for the camera?
John Wu from 72 Ellis Place.
Thank you.
So, I think I'm always concerned about edge cases. I think this sounds like a great idea. You guys basically have the same idea as the homeowners, right? People want to keep their characters nice. People want to have a nice property, have a nice neighborhood. So, the issue that I guess comes to my mind is that I don't know, having not seen the regulation, I don't know how specific it is. I don't know how much latitude it gives to the historical commission. You know, I think you guys are all very good. I mean, I know McGill, I know Deborah. You know, I think you guys are all highly qualified. But I don't know, say, from 15 years from now, a new crew could take over, and they could be approving things that perhaps, in my opinion, shouldn't be approved. Or on the other hand, there could be a misunderstanding because a new crew wouldn't have the collective knowledge that you have to be able to really rule on what's appropriate for Ellis and what's appropriate for Austin and what's appropriate for our community. So just how specific are the regulation, or is it really at the discretion of the village commission, whoever might be serving on it at that time?
Can I speak on this part? Okay. There are guidelines that we go by. It's,
Right, I'm sorry, that wasn't the question, though. You are here, and I'm sure you go by the guidelines. That's very much appropriate. However, if you were not here, and we all have succession planning problems, right, in all, you know, walks of life. So you're the expert. You're here. We trust you. No problem. So somebody else, 20 years from now, come in your seat. They're kind of a new age kind of person, and they felt like plastic sidings is appropriate for the historic corrector, or they felt like solar panels are appropriate substitute for windows because that's the fashionable thing 20 years from now. So are the regulations going to get specific to the point where they would essentially write this into the regulation in order to prevent essentially a bad actor situation 20 years from now when all you guys are retired and enjoying your lives and not dealing with this nonsense? Or, are we talking about truly at the discretion of the Historic Commission, whoever happens to sit on that board?
Well, what I was beginning to say is that, well, first of all, I don't know what will happen 20 years from now. But currently, we use the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic buildings. It's put out by the National Park Service. It's guidelines. It's like the historic preservation standard of the treatment for historic buildings, and it's. I would like to think that we don't make decisions on our whim. We don't make this stuff up,
But someone else might.
Yeah.
That's the concern.
But let me say this, that we have a succession process here. We have a rotating process where each board member serves for X number of years, and then after a year, he or she can come back on the board. And there isn't, so far in my experience, there aren't people knocking on the doors to volunteer. So I think as you look around here, you see that we have been here for a considerable period of time. So
I know you're long-serving and distinguished, a long and distinguished career. On the.
I'm 80. 20 years, I'll be gone. So, but it's a process that's built in so that there's always a history. There's always somebody on the commission that experienced what went before, or several people, so that I don't think, as a practical matter, a commission coming in 20 years from now is going to say okay to vinyl siding.
Adam, did you have something you're looking for?
Yeah,
something?
I'm double checking the code, but
Actually, I was just going to, can I just?
Go ahead.
Really quickly. I agree with what Joanne said. We can't guarantee you anything in 20 years. You should consider, though, the Historic Preservation Commission meetings, which occur monthly, have public notice, are open to the public. So if you get wind that somebody down the street is doing something and you want to see what those plans are, and you may not be happy with what you heard they're going to do, you're welcome to come to a meeting and express that.
So your
Right?
answer
This
seems
is-
to be
this
it's
is-
up
this
to
is
the
a
residents
system-
to take charge of this.
Well, the climate is always going to change. Your neighborhood is organic. It's going to change over
Sea
time.
level's gonna rise
Yeah,
and
the
all that.
political climate changes. It's organic, and we will change. And I guess as much as local landmarking might protect your investment and create a little bit of a layer, a little buffer about what can happen, at the end of the day, you still need to be responsible homeowners and ensure that that stays on task if you feel something is happening that you don't like.
So let me put another follow-up question to the
You have the
panel,
right to do that.
which is about another edge case. Now, I work a little bit with labor negotiations, which are always messy. Now, what happens with labor negotiations is that when the two sides reach an impasse, you have a process that's laid out for binding arbitration. So both sides submit their best and final offer to a binding arbitrator, who then would decide which one of the options to choose, or to send both back to the drawing board, and this process continues, and there are defined time limits and that sort of thing. So the concern here, based on what you described, it sounded like an open-ended process. So you have a homeowner who comes to the commission board to request for a certificate of appropriateness, and it sounds like that process continues until there is a resolution. Now, is there any provision for any kind of binding arbitration where an arbitrator will be brought in to determine what is the appropriate way forward, or essentially the historical commission has absolute power to deny the certificate of appropriateness continually and repeatedly for a long period?
Stuart?
Mr. Wu, why don't I answer that question for you? The HPC ultimately will make a determination as to whether there should be a certificate of appropriateness. If the homeowner is dissatisfied with that decision,
With that finding, yes.
they can go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and ask the Zoning Board of Appeals to reverse it.
Which is a village
Got another village board.
organization.
That's
Okay.
right.
What number of the board members have to approve to get that certificate?
It has to be, well, a quorum of the board is 4, so you'd have to have 4 members voting in favor to have a certificate of appropriateness issued, because you have a 7-member board. It has to be a majority. And it's a majority of the stated number. So that would be of 7, so it would have to be 4. So any approval would require 4 votes. But in response to what you're saying is that and it doesn't go, at the end of the day, the HPC is going to make a determination.
Okay.
If the homeowner is dissatisfied, they can then go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and say, I believe I'm entitled to this certificate of appropriateness. The Zoning Board of Appeals agrees, they can issue the certificate of appropriateness.
So it becomes a zoning issue
It would
essentially
then-
at that
well,
point.
it would then, well, what it is that the Board of Trustees in the legislation has determined that an appeal from a historic preservation decision would go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. We've basically given the ZBA the authority to determine
To
that.
determine
Right.
if that's,
And ultimately, if the homeowner is not happy with that, they can go to State Supreme Court in White Plains. I mean, I'm just, that's, but there.
it's a lot of work, but hey, you answer the question.
But there's no binding arbitration. At the end of the
Okay.
day, there's no binding
That's
arbitration.
right, so it's an appeals process followed by court action if necessary.
If necessary, correct.
I think this is
One quick
great.
follow-up
Oh.
about the discretion granted to the
Yes.
HPC. Joanne noted that we look to the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. That's actually written into the code, okay? So that is our guideline. It's not left to our unbridled
And for
discretion.
anybody who would take your seat in 40 years' time.
That's right,
So it's based on the U.S. Department of Interior Historic
correct.
Preservation Standard.
Correct.
Please, take my seat.
And I like to add, I've been on the Historic Preservation Commission for a little over 25 years. That's a quarter of a century. And we've never had something go to that length of going to the zoning board.
Well, it means you guys are good negotiators and good mediators, I guess.
No, it's, the applications aren't, a new roof, yes, you need a new roof. Like Alan said, slate, nope, that's not affordable. What can we do? And still be within the appropriateness of the neighborhood. It's not rocket science,
And it's not basically an adversarial procedure.
No.
It's basically your neighbors and your village working to preserve your neighborhood.
As I said, I worry about the edge cases. So,
Okay,
but
yeah.
I think 99% of the time it will go over with no issue. We worry about the 1%.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
You're welcome.
You want to come up to the mic, please?
Thank you. Hello, I'm Bill Fogel. I recently, about a year ago, purchased 48 Ellis Place. I'm an investor. I'm a resident in Briarcliff Manor, and I thank you all for your service. I'm sure you're all experts in your field. So I'd just like to voice, with all due respect, I guess my strong opposition to the proposed historic district for a number of reasons. I guess on a big picture standpoint, again, I'm sure you're all much better at decorating and and historic preservation than I'll ever be, but a big picture standpoint, I kind of feel like it's taking some of my property rights. I purchased this property. I didn't know that, there was nothing on the books that I'd have to go to a board and seek approval if my door broke or if my windows broke or if I wanted to change the roof, so I kind of feel in some respects like although you're great at what you do, I still don't, I still like to make the decision myself. Secondly, I also believe, despite what you may say, I think it meaningfully detracts from the economic value of all of our properties. As an investor, I know what attracts me is to be able to buy something, make it beautiful, and at some point I might actually have my kids move into this place on Ellis Place, or I might move there at some point, but I like to make it beautiful, I like to make it my own, and yeah, by enacting various standards and having to get this certificate, it really hinders my ability, and I would put a much lower value. In fact, if this was a historic district in advance, not that I don't think historic districts are beautiful, but I would put a tremendously lower value on what I'd be willing to pay for the property. And even if I wasn't buying as an investor, if I was buying as an individual with my wife and my 3 kids, I would also put a much lower value on the property, because I never know, you guys, I'm sure you're great people, but I never know what you're going to say when I come in for a certificate of appropriateness. I never know what personalities, what politics might come into play. So I think it detracts from the value of the building. And also specifically in Ellis Place, a lot of the properties do need a significant amount of work. If you've been on it, the exteriors need significant amount of work. Some of them, I believe, have the old asbestos type tiles, and I worry that it's going to cost people significantly more to remodel or renovate or do those needed renovations that have to happen to make the block beautiful, having an oversight board. As we know, it's going to be a lot more costly if you have to bring architects and bring samples to you guys, and you turn them down 2 or 3 times, and then they have to redo it. Some people just won't do the work that's needed, and I worry it's going to actually result in a further deterioration of the neighborhood, because again, a lot of these places need, a tremendous amount of work, and thirdly, I think that will hurt the tax base of Ossining. We all want Ossining to do well, and we all want higher values for the properties and for the places to look beautiful. I mean, honestly, when I walk down Ellis, even though there's some beautiful houses and a lot of people do a lot of work, a lot of the places, need work done that will increase the values and then increase the tax base of the community and of Ossining. And I think creating an oversight board creates a disincentive for people to invest. It creates a disincentive for people to want to buy the places because of all of the additional regulatory and expenses it's going to cost to renovate them. And I honestly don't think it's right for Ossining. And I love Ossining. That's why I'm investing. I want to buy more places in Ossining, and I want them to make them beautiful. But for me, I wouldn't do so. If this was a historic district, I wouldn't buy any more places in this district. I might very well sell mine, because I don't want to have to go through a 60, 90-day, or however long the process is going to be to replace my windows, replace a roof, fix things. And I don't want to. I want to maintain the historic character. I want to make the houses beautiful. But for that incremental regulatory hurdle, not knowing, and it's also the not knowing whether you're actually going to be able to get this done in the end, and what the time frame is, and what the cost is, and what the demands are, and you guys might be reasonable, but the people that come next year might not be reasonable. A lot of things could happen. So, thank you for hearing me out, and I sincerely hope that it doesn't go through.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone want to respond to that?
I can get you a buyer. Now, if you're looking to sell 48 Ellis, I know.
Okay.
I don't want to buy it, but
Yeah. Bonnie, were you in line here?
I'm here. But I did. No, I've been waiting 2 times. Bonnie Cole, 33 Ellis. I had the pleasure of meeting you all over the summer at my house. I have a bunch of things to say, but I'm going to start with one that I wasn't going to say first, and the response to the gentleman from 48 Ellis. In the 22 years I've lived at Ellis Place, I have seen the block without historic designation increase in beauty. Everyone, new owners have been really remodeling their properties without anyone saying, well, pick these historic colors or do this to your porch. And I can only say for myself, I put my house back to pretty much the way it looked in 1865, and I didn't need anyone to tell me, to do that. And I can't tell you how many neighbors, and they'll speak because they're right here, have done the same thing. And the block, Eric Schatz restored the 2 houses next to 48, I believe, actually 42 and 44 were beautifully restored. Next to me, 35 and 37, the lovely Tom and Fred, restored the house without, to exactly what it was in 1890 when it was built at great expense, and with materials that are going to, they look beautiful, they're modern, but they will withstand the test of time. The back of that house is going to be up for 100 years. Anyway, so you, Alan, and a couple people answered my questions about the tax incentive, which was number one. But with the new tax laws, it seems that it's rather up in the air that there could or could not be an incentive, a tax incentive for living in a historic district. Personally, I bought my house because it was historic, and that's what we wanted, and we paid a lot more. So it kind of is in a different view from what we had. I paid for history. The second thing is, 2 Ellis is already part of the Main Street Historic District. I'm pretty sure. So that's, I have some negatives that I was going to bring up, but I don't think I will. I don't know I will. There are costs involved, but it doesn't matter whether you're in a historic district or not. I had to get architect plans for repairing 6 steps and my front porch that had one termite-ridden beam holding it up. So that cost me, but that didn't have anything to do with whether it was historic or not. It just, the planning department said, no, you have to have an architect's design. So that cost a fortune to do that. The other is the next things I've got a lot, but I'm senior, so I can't remember it all. There are benefits to the village of Ossining. And one thing that if Ossining wants Ellis Place to be a historic district, I think the village has to put some money up and get the sidewalks repaired. I think the trees, the reason Ellis was historic in the 1860s, 90s, up through, and my neighbor Mickey, who recently passed, used to talk about the trees along the street. They were elm trees, they were not safe, and yes, they do fall down, but I believe that it's the responsibility of the village to put something that is maybe shorter trees that won't take out the electrical lines or put the electrical underground, or I think the trees need to be replaced. Make it, if you're gonna do it, and it sounds like you guys are well on the way. I think we all did what we have been doing, what we need to do to make the place, the street, historic. And it has changed. The new owners are really committed, and so I personally don't see a need for anyone saying. We've had our walking tours that are well attended of Ellis, and I don't know how many now, 3 or 4 since I've been here. But those are my comments. And I guess I don't have questions other than I could go on and on about the repairs that I made, that if, I had to put new chimneys in. There was no way those chimneys were going to be like they were in 1865. I'm sorry. There were things that I had to do to make the house safe that, somebody could say, no, you can't do it, it's not historic. But, so that would, you're kind of speaking to those issues. But you, you really don't know all that's involved in the expense.
Well, actually, I think
Or,
almost
no,
all
some
of
of
us
you do.
live in old houses, so we
some of you
certainly
do.
do.
I'm sorry, you do. But, yeah, you do. So I don't know whether it needs to be designated historic or not. We're doing what we need to do. Get us trees, get us sidewalks, get us, you know, and we're taking care of it, I think, so.
Okay, thank you. Next. Unless, does someone up here want to respond? Okay,
Hi, Wendy Tittle, 30 Ellis. I appreciate that you've answered a lot of my concerns before I could bring them up, but I do have to ask, as Bonnie brought up, curious about some benefits and givebacks to us, because I am very concerned, and I'm voicing that I am on the fence, but not really for it. Walked in here feeling like, no way, burn this down, don't want any part of it, but very happy to hear some positive input. But seeing the street, and I've brought lots of amazing photos of things that are going on that I'm concerned about. I would like to hear about, are there any plans for publicizing it or cleanup? I mean, as I walk through the village, my street every day, several times a day with 2 dogs, I believe I notice a lot more details than some of our other homeowners may or may not, because I have more exposure to it. My biggest concern is I feel that this is, although it's interesting and I love my historic home, I feel like there's a lot of misplaced energy in that. There are issues I feel that are not addressed that need to be addressed before we consider this a viable proposition to celebrate the beauty of what's there without repairing and looking at things that aren't being addressed, such as sanitation. I'm a dog walker. I see a lot of homeowners that don't, and people that maybe don't live in my block that don't keep the block as clean. There's an extensive amount of garbage and litter that I feel is not addressed. So it's basically a discussion of, aren't there things we should be prepping to make this worthy of celebrating and showcasing? I don't feel it's necessary or intelligent to showcase a block that has days and days of garbage, personal possessions, dog litter, unsanitary conditions, and then saying, wow, don't we all want to make a big deal about Ellis Place? So how do we address that before? So cart before the horse. Can we address that? And I understand you're not the building department, you're not the sanitation department, but how do you feel about addressing those issues so that we make it a viable proposition and I can feel proud to support this and say, I want it?
Ms. Tittle, maybe I can make one request of you.
Sure.
If you have those issues, make a complaint, if you have not, to the building department. No, have you? If you have, then because it's important.
Very, I agree.
Because they are the ones who write the tickets for the condition. We are now writing.
I agree.
We are now writing
But-
ticket. Let me finish. We're
Yep.
now writing tickets for solid waste violations, which we did not write before. We now have tickets. We have at least 8 to 10 every Tuesday now.
I was
in
going
the
to say,
Justice
have they
Court.
been enforced?
Yes, and people are paying. So we.
Where? Just Ellis?
Wherever it's seen, but we need to get complaints. I have 2 code enforcement officers who cover the entire village of 30-some-odd thousand people.
That's thin, that's
Which
thin.
means that
Yeah.
if there is a complaint, they will react promptly, but they
Okay.
have to have the complaint. So if you see
Sure.
the garbage outside, if you see people are leaving possessions out that they shouldn't be out there, call the
Got a
building
folder.
department,
Yeah.
call the village manager up, and make the complaint, because they
Right.
will get someone out, they will write the ticket, and unlike our orders to remedy, which are for building violations,
Sure.
if the garbage is out, that is an automatic violation, even if they clean it within 10 minutes. And I can tell you, generally, since we've been writing them, people come in, they pay the tickets right away, and they clean it up. So.
But are they repeat offenders?
Then their fine goes up. Then it goes to 300, then it goes to 1,000.
Good.
So the point is, thank you, Linda.
There's a refrigerator in front of 14.
Forever, for quite a long time.
So the point is, you just have to make us aware of it, because we unfortunately cannot get everywhere we'd like to get.
No, and I'm not asking you to be the code enforcers, but what I'm saying is I feel like I feel like this is a lot of cart before the horse because there is so much going on. It's a preponderance of it, and I see it every day, and I feel disheartened. I spent a lot of money in 2005 to buy a beautiful, historic Victorian home. I'm 30. That house is, sorry, I think the nicest house on the block or the second nicest house on the block. We've spent an incredible amount of money redoing our exterior and wanting it to be my dream home. I'm an antique collector. This is where I wanted to be. I've been in Ossining since college, so I picked this block and said, this is where I want to be. But I'm feeling like, how do we make that all happen? There's so much that needs to be redone. There are so many homes that don't meet to the level and don't have the economic viability to bring the level up. So are we cherry picking and saying there's 10 people on the block that are willing and financially able to bring that to the table and keep their part of the bargain and make it great, but what about the rest? And of course you can't force people. So I feel like we're getting a hodgepodge of this one's great, this one's great. We know we have to do this. How do we get other people excited or financially capable of picking up the slack as much as they can?
To some extent, I know in Sparta we have a Sparta Association, a neighbors association that, again, it has no jurisdiction, no legal standing, but through picnics and parties and get-togethers, there is some effort to keep the neighborhood
With all
together.
due respect, I took a wonderful drive-by through Sparta this weekend. You have very, very different community there. You have 4 times the land lots. You have less people. You don't have multifamilies the way we do in that area. Not count them. Look at
On my block,
not as many.
the houses
Not
are-
nearly. What is the length of Sparta? So I started beginning of Goldfish and went all the way down towards the prison. So how long an expanse are you covering with Sparta?
Revolutionary Road.
Is it all the whole Revolutionary?
No,
That-
Revolutionary
is it-
Road up to, what's the one that goes up the hill?
Does it go up to Spring? Does it? It doesn't
Still
include Spring, does it?
It includes
To Still.
Still Court, Revolutionary.
I know it still is.
To the corner, around Spring Street, up to the street Alan lives on, and then Liberty, to the,
To the
where it turns
park,
to the river.
but
Yeah,
not
to the
Hudson
park.
Street. That's not technically.
It's actually more than yours, and it's several
yeah.
different
Yeah,
blocks.
it is. I mean, I'm not saying the neighborhoods are comparable, but I'm saying to some extent.
Well,
Well, let me,
That's-
I
Sure.
interrupt?
it's kind of my fear, you know.
Sparta is not Ellis Place. You're right.
Sure.
It's a revolutionary neighborhood.
Very different to me. Different.
Ellis Place, as Alan spoke earlier on, is a neighborhood of merchants and professionals that lived on that street. It's that part of Ossening's history. And actually, maybe Deborah could speak on this, that type of neighborhood is connected to the bigger history of the region, the state, and the nation. Just like Sparta is important to that revolutionary era. Now, having spoke on that, the court before the horse, I'm sort of thinking, flip that on its head. The neighborhood is historic. I would say most of the homeowners take such pride in their house, just like you do. By locally landmarking the neighborhood, we are giving it protection. Let's say there is a house that is behind. That doesn't mean that owner or that house doesn't have a chance to catch up later. And when they do, what do you want them to do? Or that house changes hands. There's a lot of variables. But
Of course, there's people, and people have variables. But as I see the neighborhood, and I've been there for 14 years now, I've seen a lot of deterioration. It's disheartening. I wish this started 20 years ago, because I feel at that point, you would have had a break in time to say, let's not let it happen, and yes, I do want the bleeding to stop, that's part of it, so do we put the Band-Aid on, or do we keep it off and say, it's easier for me to sell my house, the next person coming in might have an easier time. I clearly know that whoever would want to buy my house is going to target it the way I did. This is not a high ranch, this is a Victorian. They're going to look at it and see you did this, this, this. So it's less probably for myself, but more for the overall block. I am concerned with the same thing. Got to get a certificate. May not pass. Someone's sick. They can't have the board meeting. A month goes by, another month goes by. Those are real life points for people to say, I don't want to buy in that block. Probably not for someone that just wants to be a crazy antique lover and get number 30 or whichever, but for others.
Well,
And
if I'm sorry.
it's worrisome.
Yeah.
So
I think, with the last three speakers, one thing occurred to me. First of all, I believe it was 20 years ago, or maybe shorter period of time, when this matter did come before the public to create a historic district, and there was a lot of opposition, and it wasn't done. So, the commission stepped back, and it didn't happen. So now 10 years or so have passed, and we thought, again, let's see what the new neighbors, the new people.
I think that was more than 30 years ago.
Have to.
What was Roger, I think
say
Roger Pelleton's
about
wife was?
More than 30 years ago.
What is going on. Now, for the people like that have, that are taking care of their property and they're doing everything that they believe should be done to maintain it, you're doing the right thing anyway. And if you went to the.
Then why do I need a commission?
To the board of, the zoning board or the planning board or whatever, and you want to do some work, and it would take time too.
Right, you're not going to jump over the planning board. There's still a planning board. We get that.
You go before the board. It'd be basically the same process. It's not any more time-consuming than anything else in the village. Sure, you want an instant decision. I could understand that, but again, it's not any different than it is with the planning board, the zoning board, or any other board that you have here in the village. It does take time, it does. And basically, what I found in my personal experience is that the homeowners or the building owners, even when they come with professional architects, they're completely unprepared to come to the meeting. They've been told exactly what they need to bring to the meeting. They don't bring it. We published architectural guidelines book. Okay, it's on the web. You can download it.
Is that?
You can see it, and people, professional architects I'm talking about, come to the meetings and they haven't done the research. So we got to say no. Here's what the guidelines are. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to have to bring. So it's a constant educational process, and that causes.
But you're putting that out.
Yes, I'm done. I'm done.
No. The review board is putting out these guidelines versus the building department. You said you have a set of guidelines you've put out for builders.
Guidelines, I guess we.
It was planning board. It was in conjunction actually with the zoning board, the planning, all the land use boards got together and decided to make a booklet. It's PDF'd and on the website. It's just about Austining in general ways, general guidelines. So, I mean, the guidelines are very, it's not really historic preservation. Since Austining character is, Austining's a treasure trove of historic preservation. I mean, we have so many intact, amazing buildings in town that I'm afraid other villages just don't have. Where was I going with this? That they're two separate. I mean, when we see an application, we really go by the Secretary of the Interior standards for historic preservation. I believe the other document was made to help developers and architects who come into town to work on developments to sort of give them a general idea of what Austining's looking for. And that's not necessarily the Historic Preservation Commission. That's the planning and zoning board.
Right.
The one thing I wanted to speak to, because you brought this up, I believe it's what I'm hearing, and I think I've heard others say it. Actually, the National Register criteria for evaluation of historic properties has a clause that speaks to an issue I hear brought up here, and that is something that represents a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. So while there are buildings that may not meet your standard, or an owner that maybe has done something that you'd prefer they had not done, that doesn't take away from the fact that when you go up Ellis Place, the scale of the buildings, the period of their construction, their original intent, if it's not there now, is so visible that you can tell that. You can tell which buildings are Queen Anne buildings. You have an American Foursquare with a brick front porch, which I'm sure was not there originally. But when you look at that building, you know it's a Foursquare, right? 2 stories, square plan with a hip roof, dormers. I mean, that doesn't change the fact that those things are recognizable. So a historic district provides for an environment where each individual house may not merit distinction on its own, but as a collective group, you have something that's a little greater than the individual pieces.
And I think with landmarking, you can at least say that whatever changes individual homeowners might make will not take it further away from the historical integrity. That is, they won't be able to put a big picture window replacing 2 historic windows if it's landmarked.
Right.
And the other thing is, I'm sorry to hear about the garbage and the mess, and I don't know what the answer to that is, because you can ask my husband, there were
Plastic
3
bag
weeks
every
in a
morning.
row where I'd walk out my sidewalk to where it terminated at the street, and I stepped in dog poop every time.
Oh, wow.
And I was so angry, because I thought, okay, I did it again. What's wrong with me that I didn't check out where I put my foot first?
I mean, quite frankly, it's disgusting. That's why I said, when I heard this proposition, I thought,
Yeah.
this is a street full of dog poop and garbage.
Plastic
and
bags.
Many people that don't. Well,
Plastic bags blow all over the place. Drives me crazy. They're hanging from the trees.
the point is, as a collective, as a community, I feel that I wanted that addressed before we say, let's put lipstick on a pig here. Sorry, it's a big concern. And I'm torn because, like I said, I picked this block, I picked my house, I spent years waiting to live there. My old landlord, when I first moved into Ossining, lived on Ellis, and once in a while we'd drive up there to bring them the red check, and I went, this street is fucking awesome. I want to live here, and I do. But
I don't think we're putting lipstick on a pig. I think we're trying to say, let's preserve what we have. Let's do
Let's
as
save the
much
pig.
possible to keep it as it is. It's not a question of lipstick. It's not a question even of taking. Somebody mentioned the word taking. By having a historic district, we are not taking anybody, the village is not taking anybody's property. We have to consider the entire village, okay, and what's benefits the whole of it. So yeah, there are some things that I don't like personally, but looking at the big picture, first of all, I do know for a fact that the values of a historic district do improve over time, okay? It doesn't.
Is that when the collective
You can look at
is
any-
greater than the
any historic
components,
district,
or?
existing historic district, and you will search that district, and you will see that it is a district where people want to live there. They want to buy more, and they will pay more. So it is a good investment in a sense. It is a good investment. You don't lose you don't lose investment by having a historic district. Okay, but there's data there that will show that. I'm not sure that showing the data will convince anybody, but nevertheless, it is there. It does show that a historic district preserves, keeps the neighborhood, improves the neighborhood, introduces a quality of stability in the neighborhood. It's not up and down changes, not people moving in and out constantly. They want to be there, they stay there, and you know, if they want to, they can pass it on to their children, or at the end, sell it. And they will not, you know, I'm sure you could find instances where people will lose, the value will decrease. There are instances of that, obviously. But on the whole, in the big picture, it's a positive. But, you know,
Is
we're
there,
going to listen to what, you know, everybody
know.
says, and we're going to take that all into advisement.
just an odd question, when something is determined a historic district, do they disincentivize other homes from becoming multifamily? What would happen if the next home wants to go from single to multifamily? I'm not looking to do that, just a
That depends
curious
on zoning.
question.
We have no
Do you-
say over zoning.
That's just straight zoning.
So
Okay.
what's as of right is what's allowed in your neighborhood. And
That's not your
anything
department.
that's not to everyone's liking needs
Well-
to be addressed, and through a zoning change, that's something that's not us.
Do you hear of it, bring it to the attention, work with us to say, the residents of Ellis Place may feel that this is not a good addition to the block? Would you be an adversary in any discussion for changes that may be slightly or completely out of your jurisdiction, if we bring it to you?
I don't think we need to be.
You don't think you need
It
to
is-
what?
It is, I don't think there's anything, it's beyond our purview to stand in the way of someone's conversion into a multifamily house, if that's your question. But I can tell you, it's pretty hard to convert a single-family home to a multifamily home in the current climate now.
Legally or illegally?
Well,
We mean legally.
legally. Well,
You haven't seen some basements in the neighborhood,
No,
obviously.
I certainly understand that. I didn't say it's easy to change human behavior.
We're talking law, I
We don't
understand.
exist to prevent people from doing that. I'm saying that to convert a home to a multifamily home, you have to provide off-street parking. You have to show that you've got fire egress. It's hard to do. Okay. Now, I can't speak to. I can tell you this much: I can't sell a house with an illegal apartment in it. I can't do it, and none of my colleagues can either, unless we find a cash buyer, and a cash buyer is not going to take something with all those violations. So it's just what I do. I've been quiet all meeting, but that part
It's
I
okay,
can
my
tell
mom
you-
sold real estate from the time I was 10.
Yeah, but
get
since
it.
the,
I
but
get it.
unless your mother sold in the past 5 or 10 years with the astonishing amount of
Not an Ellis.
of regulations put on us by the financial institutions that want to see an incredible amount of compliance with the property. It is incredibly hard to get a mortgage on a property that is not in compliance. And if an appraiser goes into a house and they note that there is an extra kitchen or that there is an extra apartment, that is going to have to either be made legal
They're not
or
gonna
it's
get a
going to have to be
CFO. I
taken
know.
out.
Yep. All right, thank you.
And just a note, remember that we do rule on changes to the exterior, which would include things like
Fire escapes.
like a second door, fire
escapes,
escape,
yep.
new steps.
That's
I don't
multifamily.
know about new driveway and parking facilities, but, I mean, many of these would be red flags in terms of the historic
Conversion, yeah.
appearance of the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Linda, are you approaching the mic?
What, honey?
Yeah. Introduce yourself.
I didn't hear what you said.
I said, I asked if you were approaching the mic.
Yes, I am.
Good.
Hi, Linda A. I own and live in 38 Ellis Place, a one family. But I also own my attached house, 36 Ellis, which is a legal two-family. If it ain't broken, don't fix it. I'm living on Ellis Place 34 years, and I do everything I can to maintain my homes. People who know me know Tuesdays don't bother me at 2 o'clock. I go to building department court. I have learned so much. Those new tickets you're giving out, I've been nagging the village administration for at least 2 years to start issuing them. It's 100 for the first violation, 250 for the second.
Stand correct.
but read the lawsuit with Jerry Smith. You got to see who puts the garbage out. I am thoroughly and completely opposed to making Ellis Place a local historic district. If anybody here lives on Ellis and you want your house to be historic, do it to yourself. Don't do it to me. I don't want government in my pocket. I want to be left alone, unless I want to come to a board meeting and open my big mouth. But if you want a historic home, put your papers in to make your home historic, but don't make me do it. A year or two ago, I think it was 2 years ago, I needed a new bedroom window. I was freezing sitting at my computer. Called the building department. What do? Well, you need a permit, you need architectural drawings, and you need a licensed contractor. It's a 32-inch window. I'm putting the same size in, and I'm told an architect. For what? It's the same size window going in. Well, the laws haven't changed since then, or they reneged on something. The laws weren't changed. I was given incorrect information. People would be fixing, repairing a small section of a roof on Ellis Place. Building department drives by, stop work. You need a permit. Was it last summer, my neighbor Bonnie over here, she was replacing her steps. She called the building department, as I understand it, and they said, nope, to replace the steps, you don't need a permit. Well, the contractor took the wood off the steps, and the stringers were rotten. So Bonnie said, go ahead, change them while it's open. Building department drove by and said, you don't have a permit. But I didn't need one. No, you only said replacing the steps. You didn't say the stringers. Did I get that right?
I remember. No, it was the step.
Yeah, she was. It was a Friday afternoon, and the contractor had to stop dead in his tracks. I went berserko. I called the building manager. He stopped what he was doing. Not the building manager, the
Village manager.
The village manager. He stopped what he was doing, came over and said to the contractor, ignore the stop work order. Finish the steps for the people. People just don't know where to turn. I think this is adding an extra level of government. I don't want it. I am 100% opposed to it. What is this if you make my house on a historic street, make the street historic, what do I gain from this? And what does the village gain from it? I read Lynn's letter that she sent out, and it's going to promote tourism, hockey puck. I'm opposed to it. I don't want it.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Anybody want to respond? Okay, do we have any, yeah, please.
Hello, I know many of you. I'm Robert Stava. I'm at 2 Linden Avenue. I'm not on Ellis Place, but somehow I got roped into these proceeds. And a lot of these questions have been addressed. I'm just going to echo that. My major concern is that a lot of the work that's being done around the neighborhood is very illegal. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at you, but I had to, because the house across from us had 8 apartments put into it, and I was complaining about those violations for 8 years and was ignored. And they've been going up and down Linden Avenue. It's a terrible state of affairs. And my concern is that we'll be held to a different standard than what's going on right on my street. And it seems to be very arbitrarily enforced. So I don't have a lot of confidence in this, but I feel like. I love history. I'm a trustee on the Historical Society here. I've worked on historical landmark projects professionally, but I don't, unless I'm not convinced that this is not just going to add another layer of bureaucracy and hobble my efforts, because I do want to fix up my house better and improve it, while I'm watching the guy across the street, subdivide his into all kinds of illegal things. And it's going on rampant right now. And to answer your question, a lot of people are buying cash down Linden Avenue. That's been a problem. They buy cash houses. They don't have to worry about any of the mortgages or any of these inspections. That's been it's a big problem that's been going on Linden Avenue. But anyhow, just want to voice my opposition for that reason. Like Wendy, I'm not hardcore one way or the other. I'm willing to hear out the arguments, but that's my concern. Thanks.
Well, Robert, I will say that You and Wendy both expressed complaints of seeing things that are not compliant and nothing happens.
Yep.
And you heard that we have 2 inspectors.
Yeah.
Ever since I've been in Ossining, and I've been in Ossining for 35 years, this has been a common complaint. And the answer always is, we don't have staff, the village doesn't have staff to be proactive. And so it's only when people complain enough that they're able to do something. And I don't know if that helps in your situation, and I'm sure you said you've been complaining forever and nothing happened.
Well, actually, that's not actually true, because many times when I called in the department about violations I actually witnessed, I was told first that, how do I know that's happening? And I said, well, I witnessed it. I watched the people across me subdividing the attic at midnight, and was told, basically I got a lot of attitude back, like just, and I was pretty offended by that. So that's, and I was told that there's nothing they can do to get inspectors in there or anything unless there's an outright violation. It turned out the house that was the problem, which was 59 Ellis, did have finally a violation after 8 years, and the building department finally got in there and condemned the building. But my complaints were on deaf ears. They had nothing to do with me. So they got it back up to code finally after 3 or 4 months. But yeah, it's terrible. It's a disaster. So anyhow, thanks.
Okay, next.
Hi, Tom Murphy, 35 Ellis. Case study question before you. We recently did a lot of renovation on the property. One of the things I didn't do that I would have loved to have done was put in the solar panels. Beautiful southern exposure. So if I did that last year, it would have happened. So I can't see how it would have happened if I tried to do it after it becomes a historic district.
We did our first solar panels last year. We approved. Now, that is on an infill, non-contributing house in Sparta, and we did regulate the amount to which they could be seen from the street and tried to have the predominant part on the back of the building rather than on the front. But we have, I think historic preservation boards across the country are dealing with solar panels and are gradually finding ways to accommodate, because green is good as well as historic is good, and you can't be an absolutist.
Okay, so you think there's a way to do it?
Yeah.
'Cause I have
Lisa, did you have some experience on that?
Well, we've done them in my village.
She's from Nyack.
I'm
She's
from Nyack.
an advisor to us.
And what we have generally regulated is that, the pitch, they can't, your guy from Solar City or whoever you go to is they're gonna optimize it for maximum exposure to the sun.
Right.
And not necessarily be sensitive to how it looks.
Right.
And what this board did, and what the board that I'm on did, is really regulate the pitch, just so that it's not sticking really far off the roof. Try and have it conform with the profile of the roof as much as possible and still be effective. And then additionally, and this is sort of, taking it to the next level, there's a whole lot of great new materials that are photovoltaic materials.
Oh, of course, the shingles, right.
Replicate
It's a moving
whatever
target.
building material you want.
Right.
And not be obvious that they're solar panels. So, Joanne probably know more about those than I do.
Well, certainly, one of the jobs of the Historic Preservation Commission is to mitigate change. Change happens. Solar panels are going to happen. Different things. And on that note, on a national state level in historic preservation, they recognize that historic buildings in the energy code used to be exempt. That's changed. You know why? Because the preservationists know it's healthier for a historic building to be economically viable for its survival. And one of that is to reduce its energy costs, correct?
Sure, of course.
So no one's going to stop you from having solar panels.
So, okay.
Just
So
mitigate how it might be to the
historically,
front.
in the business of your job and across the nation, that's the history, that it gets done,
Yeah.
reasonableness. Okay, thanks.
John?
My name is John Van Steen. I do not live on Ellis Place. I live on South Highland Avenue, and I'm the owner of one of these large Victorians as you come into Ossining that many people describe as some of the architecturally important buildings along the route. I really wish we had some type of association or some type of group to provide community and to provide a buffer layer between us and everything else that happens in Ossining. 3 doors down from me, a 3-family has turned into a 6-family. Across the street from me, a permit is put through by someone who has decided to put an extra apartment in his basement, and now he's asking to have egress because he doesn't have parking. He's asked to have egress right off of Route 9 and to create a parking spot right out in front. So I had to go to the planning board and say, well, I can be like Corsi Tire and change my home into a 5-family and pave the whole front yard. Is this the way you want Ossining to look? But I shouldn't have to do that. If I had an association in my area, there is no way that these things would be so readily and so easily available to developers or people that wanted to take advantage of the property. You have an opportunity here, and this is an opportunity that you turned down 10 years ago or 20 years ago when this was advised before. We've heard differing views as far as the progress that has been made since on Ellis Place. You could make wonderful progress on Ellis Place if you had an extra layer of protection. And this affords you that layer of protection. I envy your opportunity. I wish I had that opportunity myself.
Sure. Come back up so we get you in the mic. Oh, sorry.
Steve Casey, 43 Ellis, once again. Just to echo I sympathize with some of the comments made by Wendy and Robert. I generally am in favor of such a designation, so I just thought I'd let you know that. But and maybe we need another type of association to deal with the problems that we've been talking about, which seem to be outside of your remit. But I would like to ask, will there be dialogue? It seems to me there needs to be education to the building department about, I've had work on my house stopped when I've had all my ducks in order, all the licenses, all the permits. Some guy drives by and says, stop work. My contractor calls me in the middle of the day and says, I'm being told to stop. What's going on? And then I have to start making phone calls. Fortunately, I was able to get it going in about a half hour again because I was able to call the right people. But it seems to me there needs to be an education of that building department about what is allowed, what is not allowed. And if you're going to have historic designation and historic things done, what you're doing it needs to be communicated to that department, and they need to be educated, maybe in a real sit-down session. Here's what this is all about. Here's what we're doing. When you get applications or requests to do things, it's this kind of sensitivity you need to take into account, rather than, no, that's against code, you can't do it, or et cetera, et cetera.
I will say that my first official action this year in the beginning of the year was to sit down with Lynn and someone from the building department and try to work out really clean communication among us so that we all are on the same page. And it hasn't always been easy, and we're trying to move in that direction, I'll say.
Okay, I'm glad to hear it, but I would like to...
Let me just make one comment, because I know there's been a lot of comments about the building department, some of which frankly are not fair, because they do work very hard, and I don't know if that's necessarily understood by all the folks
Yeah,
here.
I'm not saying they're
But
not working hard, but
I
it's
just want
this
to,
kind
let me
of-
be
yeah.
clear, because it was something that was brought out. They are guided by the state code, okay? That's the key document that they have to go by. If they see something that, and I will tell you this, they think a building has to be placarded and work stopped, I'm told. That's I know that it happens. As Corporation Counsel, I get the call that they're going to stop work on a particular location. And I go over why. Is it a safety issue? Is there something that goes on? And we go over the sections of the code that are required. Because they have to go by the code. That's the only document. They don't have historic preservation guidelines to go over. They have to go over a code. If something is being put in that's contrary to the plans, they have to stop the work. If something's being done without the proper permit, if it's being done that it's too close to a setback, they have to stop it. That's what they have to do. I'm not saying that in all cases, everything is done exactly perfectly, but what I will say is that when those issues come up, I know about them. I see every violation that's written on every single building. I know, but
I'm not saying that's not a good thing, because it does stop a lot of bad stuff that could be going on.
But my point is, in terms of educating them, it's important to understand that where they are certified is as code enforcement officers. The title describes what they do. So they go out and they check. So for example, if you pull a building permit, they have the right to inspect that the work is being done in accordance with the permit. Sometimes it turns out that you have a contractor who is doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. Work has to be stopped. We have those issues, but I can assure you, I know about each case where that happens. If an issue comes up, all you have to do is call my office up.
Okay, all right.
And I will be the one
And this is
who will know
outside
about
the remit of
It
this
is outside,
tonight,
but I think it's important because the building department plays a role
maybe-
here.
yeah,
But if you
but
have
there-
that issue, call me.
Thank you. That's good to know. Okay.
Hi, my name is Victor Vividu. I live at 27 Ellis Place, and I haven't decided whether I'm in favor or against. About 9 years ago, we spent about $70,000 restoring the exterior of our house to as original as we could figure it out. And so, you know, like was mentioned, you know, we are, you know, socially active on Ellis Place, if not politically active. I have a couple questions, one of which is, if Ellis Place was made historical district, is there a proposed schedule for other areas like M. Wilton, Maurice, Eastern Elizabeth, Clinton, Linden? Because we're more or less the same. I mean, you know, Maurice is a beautiful street with a lot of beautiful houses on it. And you got the parts, you know, that's west of Route 9, kind of the same thing, Spring Street. The street that goes right along the river, I don't know what that one's called, but, you know, talking about the gigantic mansions, you know, that have like, you know, 14 apartments in them. I mean, I know it's a challenge, we brought it up lots of times, but is there a proposed schedule that you guys have in mind after the first district, if it were Ellis, that you're gonna keep this going with?
As I said, over the years, we have a list of priorities. It's one of the things that we take into account is the ratio of contributing to uncontributing and the contiguity of the historic area. That is, we can't make a historic area which requires skipping over 4 houses that don't belong, et cetera, et cetera. And Ellis Place has a unity that some of these other places that have beautiful houses don't have. It also has the historic association of having been laid out at a certain time and having been sort of the street for a certain group of people to live on at a certain time. We have our list of future priorities, but as you know, we've spent about 2 years getting Ellis Place to this point, and there's nothing remotely close to that. There are a couple individual buildings we're looking at. We are looking at the waterfront with some of those big warehousey buildings, but that's, again, that's awfully sort of spread out and much more difficult to define, but that is in the pipeline somewhere. But yeah, I mean, we do have other things we want to look at, but Ellis Place was sort of settled on as the most contiguous, the most impressive, the closest to the downtown historic district in terms of on our walking tour of downtown, we sort of have an arrow saying, why don't you walk up Ellis Place? It's not in this district, but it's certainly worth your while to look at. So that's why Ellis Place is at the top now. There are other things that in the long term, yes, we might look at and might consider and might decide against, just as we haven't decided on Ellis Place either.
Okay.
I'd like to add, we're a group of volunteers, and these projects are things that we get to do on our own time after the end of the day. And Ellis is a district that was identified after the original HAD was designated in 1975, and the village paid a consultant to come in and look at making other historic districts, which included Ellis Place and the historic district. Well, we finally locally designated the downtown historic district a couple of years ago. That's how long it takes us to get things done. And Ellis, because there was already so much material on it, and it had already been identified previously for its historic importance, was approachable for us, something that we could attain and actually look at and put something together on. We've also landmarked other National Register listed properties that are in Ossining. We've landmarked properties on State Street, Varium down by the water. I mean, we have a long wish list of streets and buildings that are historically significant and of interest. But there's only so much time to go through, find the history, write it up, then we need to have informational meetings and go through the whole process. It takes a lot out of us. So that's how we got here.
Well, I appreciate.
I'd like to add one thing to that as well. I mean, moving forward, I think threat is going to play an important role in our determinations of which districts or individual structures ought to be landmarked. And that's sort of the unspoken specter here of a threat. At HPC, what we're trying to do is slow things down. You've heard the words mitigate used and preserve changes that are consistent with the existing historic environment. There's a constant threat that sometimes developers, sometimes property owners themselves want to do just what's quickest and easiest, what'll make the quickest and fastest buck. And so, I'm looking at your house, it's just beautiful. And what happens if, a new homeowner comes in next door or a developer comes in next door, and the most expeditious thing to do is to level the house and put up a plastic mansion next to your beautifully restored home? That's what our mandate is, to slow things down, not to stop change, but to keep the changes that come consistent with the beautiful structures that exist.
Okay. All right. Now, there's some modern amenities that not only do we like, but prospective home buyers, when our time comes when we do want to move on, whether downsize or upsize or whatever. Well, maybe not upsize, but so things like hot tubs, built-in barbecues. If they were hidden from the street, would these and would that type of thing still be considered reversible, or if it was in some ways, like on my piece of property, I'm surrounded by houses and trees. I mean, you put something behind the house, no one's ever going to know. But that being said, is that type of exception or is that type of acceptable for appropriateness?
Reversibility is only one of the considerations. If you look at Joanne's house, it's got a whole modern kitchen wing added onto the back, but it's on the back. When you see it from the side, it doesn't distract from the beautiful historic house that it's attached to, but it's mainly behind it. And up the block, there's the people who put in the modern Swedish art studio behind their historic house, but they put some trees in front of it, And again, it doesn't distract when you're walking down the street. So it's not just reversibility. Yes, putting something behind the house.
I was thinking more
Well,
along the lines.
I would
Yeah,
also
let me-
suggest that we
not
wouldn't
seen
be,
from the street.
I would also suggest that we wouldn't be reviewing temporary structures. A barbecue, unless you're building some big brick
I was thinking
structure.
brick type thing, yeah.
You know, where if you're placing a hot tub in your backyard, those are things that, honestly, a temporary structure, you're not changing your house.
Okay. If there was a rogue homeowner making unapproved changes to their home, let's say they got they got some legal approval to make the change, could the board stop it if it didn't meet the criteria, or would that go through the building department?
Stop work order would come from the building department. This
Okay.
board does not have the authority to stop the work.
Okay, so say, you know,
But they wouldn't get a certificate of
I think he's asking in a weird situation that they
Oh.
got a permit. You're asking if something happened that the person got a permit? Because if they need a certificate of appropriateness, to follow up on Miguel, they can't get a permit without a certificate of
And
appropriateness.
the building department is aware of what is in the certificate of appropriateness in terms of what is agreed upon that can happen. And if that is not followed through, then there is the stop work.
say there was a strange thing that where someone over like a 3-day weekend, you know, did something, say masonry work or whatever they were able to do in a 3-day weekend with 3 or 4 people, and boom, it's there. Can it be pulled out?
The answer to that question is the violation would be issued, and if in fact it required a permit and they didn't get the permit, there can be an order to remove what is in there, particularly if it is inconsistent with the zone.
All right. If the board, if the historical board, you guys don't approve a proposed change, but say all the neighbors do, and the homeowner went and got a petition that from the majority or more than a super majority of the neighbors in that district, could the decision be changed based on the homeowners in that neighborhood believing it to be appropriate, especially in our...
Changed by us or
Well,
changed
say
by?
it was denied by the board originally,
Right.
and then I went around to all my neighbors and say out of
Goes
50...
to the zoning board of review.
Okay.
That might respond to.
Okay.
To you in a favorable manner,
Okay.
or not.
Now, I guess about a year or so ago, one of my friends on Linden was making a big deal about some people doing some illegal volleyball. I know you may have heard about this. And apparently it was a big problem. You know, betting going on, drinking, you know, activities that nothing to do with their home itself, but it was the use of the property that was certainly questionable usage, right? Does this board have any ability to help facilitate stopping that? Like this guy who took him 2 years going to everybody to stop these activities for whatever reason. I only heard his side of it. I'm sure there's more to it than that. But would this board be a resource for people on Ellis Place to, you know, for some of these activities that were not building related?
Well,
That would be questionable usage.
Well, specifically regarding that location, one thing I can tell you is complaints have to be made to the police, okay,
Which
which is
they were,
completely
by the
separate
way.
from here. I know, I'm aware of that.
Okay.
So I'm well aware of that. They also have to be, if they're operating inconsistent with the zone, that's again, you go to the building department, because it's the only the building department can issue a violation. Okay, so this board cannot issue a violation, this board cannot stop work. The planning board can't technically stop work, nor can the zoning board. The building department has to issue the violation. So if they are made aware that something is going on, if they are parking too many cars there, if they are, you know, if they have basically blacktop their entire backyard, you know, which is inconsistent with impervious coverage. That would be something that would be brought to the building inspector or the code enforcement officer. They would write a violation, and they could go from there. To the extent that some of the activities that were going on at that location, that also involved the police, and they would do their own investigation, which is completely separate from anything the building department would do.
All right. Well, my last question has to do with landscaping. If someone wanted to do, I'm not talking driveways, but what about patios, gardens? Someone's got a vegetable patch in their front yard. I mean, that's kind of, I'm not so thrilled about that, But, I mean, well, anyway, the point is that will landscaping come under your jurisdiction also?
Not softscaping, but yes, hardscaping. That is construction, especially mortar-based construction, yes. Gardening.
Clotheslines, no.
Grading,
None of
not.
Okay.
No.
All right. Thank you.
Could I ask a question as the new guy?
Sure.
What about an ADA compliance matter? What if someone needs a ramp?
Let's talk about it
You
at the
do
next
it in a
meeting.
sympathetic format.
I think that's
done every day.
It's done every day. It's like solar panels. These are things that we know are things that are going to happen, and we just work with the people to do it in a responsible and consistent and as unobtrusive a method as possible. But sure, someone lives in a house and needs a ramp, we are going to find a way for them to get a ramp.
Okay. Amanda Marsh, 50 Ellis. The document, the architectural guide, I saw it was from 2010. Has that been updated at all? Or is it still from 2010? I'm seeing the right document.
Correct.
Okay. And my second is, what is HPC doing to reach out to Spanish-speaking homeowners? There are absolutely none represented here, and they make up probably half our block. They're doing a lot of the construction work on their house so that they understand what this is and what they need to do to be part of the fabric.
Good question. I know on the Museum in the Streets, Miguel kindly did most of the translations for us. I think at least the notice for the formal hearing, if we do get to that stage, needs to be bilingual.
I mean, I tried speaking to some of my neighbors about it with my limited Spanish.
Yeah.
Didn't get anywhere, and I think they were severely underrepresented here.
Well taken point.
I should also point out that the requirement is to send the notice to the owners. So if in fact we have tenants in those buildings, the notice does not go to the tenants. Notice goes to the last owners of those particular premises. No, and if they are, that will be dealt with, but we're not at the public hearing stage yet anyway.
Right.
Right, I'm just saying that on a property,
so
they may not be
Yeah, yeah. Anything else? Sure, you want to go back up to the mic so we get you on mic? Yeah, and then we do have to wrap up. The building likes to close.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I just have another concern. I'm just wondering, what happens if, for instance, there's a fire on the street and a couple of the houses, unfortunately, get burned up, and/or if some of the houses are in such disrepair that they get condemned, and, the problem with old structures is that they're beautiful and great, but eventually they do fail, and they will have to be replaced, some of them will have to be replaced eventually. How is that addressed under the context of this process
An infill building, as I understand, has to meet the same criteria as a non-contributing building. That is, it has to be in accord with the general aspect of the neighborhood, number of stories, general proportion of window to wall, that sort of thing. And we just did in Sparta, we did an infill building that we worked on with them to make it, yes, it's a new building, but no, it doesn't stick out like,
Stuart can
incompatible.
weigh in, but what usually happens is the planning architectural review will request us to look at it, for you to come before us and tell us what your proposed plan is for your building, and we'll look at it and say, how great is that? it respects the scale of the neighborhood, it addresses the street, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, we like it. Or, gee, it's a little out of place. What other things have you considered? And we'll try to work with you to find a plan that everyone's happy with. That's usually what's happened in the past.
Okay, thank you. So I guess essentially every aspect has to be approved by you, and it's kind of collaborative back
It's a
and forth.
collaborative
but-
thing, and
but-
it's so that if someone is replacing a house next to the house that you own, the idea is that it's not going to be something egregiously different than what you would normally find on the street.
And you would come to the meeting. Let's say you were concerned about this new building that was going up. Obviously, you would have input at that point and say, I don't like what my neighbor is doing, or it's okay with me, whatever, through the normal process. But if he was going to make, he would have to come to us if he had it was radically different from a historical point of view. We had one issue, I believe, was that on Main Street, the new building?
The We Can Do It spot.
Yes, the We Can Do It spot.
Yeah, that's a whole big building, where that historic fire was on Main Street. And we worked with them for a couple of years to try to find something that was economically viable. That was the reason it took so long to redevelop that spot, but still not inconsistent with Main Street. And you can say we did a good, in the end, everyone succeeded, or in the end, it didn't work. People maintained both of those for that building, but it was a collaborative process even down to the color of the brick and the masonry and the mortar. I think we looked at mortar samples on that one and ran to the building next door and looked at what color mortar they were using.
Thank you. Yeah, I was more concerned if something happened, this would bog down the process for years, and we'd have lots that were.
And by the way, we have to act within 30 days of a completed application. We can't just let things linger.
Well, thank you so much for your time
Okay.
and your intent.
Okay. I want a quick follow-up. Sure, one quick follow-up, that's it.
Next door neighbor years ago who, two doors down, he got a permit to put up a deck. And the next door, they had a board meeting like this, and one of the neighbors objected. The reasons are unimportant, it was a personal reason, but he objected to the change on visual reasons, like he didn't like the look of the deck or something, or he'd have to look at it out of the side window. If this board approved a change and then a neighbor made a big fuss, can you overrule, or is that the buildings department only? Does that go to the buildings department?
No, the time for the neighbor to object is when the hearing is
We
taking
do have a
place.
hearing.
Yeah,
for-
but let's say he goes to the hearing.
Yeah,
And-
and if he goes to the hearing, the board is allowed, the board listens to what that person says, and the board makes a determination.
Okay, so the board still makes the determination?
Absolutely, always.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Well, I'll talk to you later.
Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming. Next week, next Monday night, April 2nd, we will be having our usual meeting in the Rodriguez Operations Center on 9A at 7 o'clock as a follow-up among ourselves, but it's a public meeting, and we welcome any members of the public to come to that.